Clarity on Fire, a podcast for people who know what they don't want out of their life and career, but aren't sure what they'd rather be doing.
In a world where it's easy to exist, but hard to feel alive, we, Kristen
and Rachel,
two certified life and career coaches, are here to help you cut through the information overload, get unstuck, and focus not just on how you can have a career you're passionate about, but how to create a whole life that feels fulfilling.
So join us here, where we serve up inspiration and down-to-earth wisdom in a way that only two best friends can.
We want you to experience the relief of knowing that, yes, you're allowed to want more out of your life and career.
And no, you don't have to wander through the dark anymore. Our job is to light the fire that shows you the way. Let's go.
Before we get into this interview with a normal person, which is a really good one, by the way, we have an announcement.
I mean, again, I'm never going to say this one was mediocre or this was not a good one.
I know. All of them are our favorites because they're all like our children.
That makes it sound like every normal person is like our children. That's what it sounds like you're saying.
I meant every podcast episode, but we could think of it that way too.
You're all my little ducklings, and I love you all. So creepy. A lot of them are older than me. Okay, yeah. So next Friday, the 20th, is when we're opening coaching enrollment again. It will be open until the 31st, so the end of the month. So that means that we're taking on, like we do, only about 3 times a year. Next time will be sometime in the summer. Haven't decided on dates yet for that. Kristen and I don't decide dates on things until usually 3 weeks ahead of time. Kind of how it goes. We have like a general outline, and then as we get closer,
the details get worked out closer to
it's fine. You know, it's like it coalesces to make a picture at some point, even though it looks like a messy blob when you're up too close to it. But if you're considering doing coaching, just know that in a week from today, we're going to be opening enrollment again. And we're only going to be taking on like 15, max 20 clients. So, and we're not going to be doing it again, not officially, for months. You can get on a wait list if it's not the right time and you know that you might want to do it before, you know, maybe 4 months from now or something. But
there's no guarantees if you're on the wait list that you're not going to have to wait, frankly.
Yeah.
So if you know that this is a good time and you want to make some changes this year, then definitely sign up to at least talk to us. Just because you're signing up to have a conversation doesn't mean you're obligated to sign up. But we do want people who are really seriously considering it, who want to make sure that this is the right thing.
Okay, you don't have to do that now. You just have to know that in a week from now, that's when this will become relevant. Cool? Cool.
You can trust that we will remind you of that.
Yeah. Okay, so now we can go on to our normal person interview.
This is an interview I'm so excited about. I don't even want to get too much into it because
already well-trod?
Yeah, exactly. But essentially, it's about what happens to you when you are fueled by self-hate and the side effects of that, including some of the more extreme side effects like addiction, because Adam has struggled with that, and how the only real cure for self-destructive behaviors like that is self-love. And how are you supposed to cultivate that? So Adam is very young and very wise. I told him he seems like a very old man in a very young man's body. And that's what I love about him because I connect with other old souls. So would you like to read his bio?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Throughout my life, I've always been the advice friend. You know, that one that people come to for support, a shoulder to cry on, an ear to rant to, and one that can be trusted to listen with an unbiased point of view. A lifetime of being this person has shaped me into someone with a great intuition and an ability to understand why people do what they do, even if they can't necessarily put their thoughts and feelings into words. It's become my passion and what I believe to be my purpose in the world. Currently, as a coach, I get to live that purpose daily. I get to use my own life experience as a person recovering from addiction and as a person who's struggled with self-hate, anxiety, and depression to support those navigating the issues those struggles can cause. Oops, we are interviewing another person who is interested in becoming a coach or is in the process of becoming a coach, right?
I know.
oops, we keep doing it.
Keep doing it.
It's not on purpose. It just kind of happens.
It does.
Maybe those are the people who are also most willing to like talk on a podcast.
Because they're starting their own thing.
Well, yeah. And they're like the most into personal development out of anybody. There's some people who are doing it more for themselves. They're like, I don't need to inspire 500 other people. I can just do this for myself.
Sometimes it's a really private experience that you don't necessarily want to share with hundreds of people. So Adam he's just fantastic. And I told him that I'd like to have him back at some point as an expert. Because I think he has some great
promised every normal person that. So
I know.
Wouldn't be right to count him out. So, okay, enjoy this and we'll be back at the end.
Hey, Adam.
Hi, Kristen. How are you?
I am good. I am so excited to have you on the podcast today. Honestly, there are so many topics that you and I could have gotten into. As you know, I was kind of struggling to even narrow them down. I was like, we could talk about this and this and this. I feel like that's because you've gained so much wisdom in your life. And you're like in your early 20s. I just feel like you've lived a lot of life already.
Too many lifetimes so far.
You've just really collected a lot of sage wisdom. So I did have to narrow it down a little bit at least. And one of the things I just really admire about you is how much work you have done in cultivating self-love and just like the huge strides you have made in that arena. So that's what I want us to get into today. I'm sure we'll touch on some other topics along the way because that's always how it goes. But I think you have a lot to share on that.
I do, definitely.
And I think you have actually been writing on this and speaking on this a little bit lately too. So that's kind of exciting. This is very relevant.
Yes, it is.
For you right now.
I feel like it's something just about everyone has some experience with and can probably relate to and benefit from.
Oh, yes. I've never yet met a person where I'm like, you are all good on self-love. Like, don't even need to worry about it anymore.
I think that's
marks.
Actually impossible.
I agree. There's always strides that you could be making on that front. And most of us could really use some more of that. So yeah, this is kind of universally necessary.
Agreed.
So as I said, you're someone who, it was clear to me just from our earliest conversation, you just like yourself and just feel like this is who I am and I feel solid in that. I mean, not that you never have moments of self-doubt or normal human insecurities, because we all do. But on the whole, like, that's something that you exude. And I think it's fair to say that getting to that place has been a bit of a journey.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
So do you want to rewind back to when your self-love was seriously lacking from where it is now? And how was that experience? Like, how was that lack of self-love showing up in your life? And you can go back as far as you want to or as recent as you want to, just to demonstrate the journey.
Sure. You know, it was really interesting thinking about this, and I'm just trying to figure out just how far back self-hate really went for me. And I really came up with the answer. I have a 3.5-year-old nephew, and he's at this age where he's starting to become aware of himself and how he fits into the world. And I think I remember that stage long around the 3-4, and I remember feeling certain ways or doing certain things that I started to figure out that I didn't fit in. And so I think I can remember strings of self-hate starting at the age of 3 and 4. And then it kind of continued and spiraled through all of childhood. I didn't know, I was a kid. I didn't know why. I didn't know what any of this was. So I never bothered really looking at it. I thought the self-hate was just reality because I didn't know any better.
Yeah, just normal. How would you know any different?
I wouldn't if I had never asked anybody, hey, do you hate XYZ things about yourself? Why would I have asked that?
Right.
And so it really continued. I don't remember there ever being a part of my childhood where it started to get better. It was just kind of a slow build up. until really probably late middle school, early high school. I can remember so clearly I say that I used to be terrified of everyone, and that was kind of true. Just incredible shyness and no ability to stick up for myself. Anything that happened, if I was not perfectly good in every way, the perfect kid to my parents, the perfect student, the perfect friend, that was unacceptable to me. And I remember having this excessive and obsessive need to find pride in external sources. I was a very competitive orchestra musician, and that became just this overblown obsession of mine because I had gotten a little success with it, and that made me feel proud in a not necessarily healthy way. And I couldn't get enough of that shallow pride feeling. And I continued on that path for several years, all the way through high school, until I finally realized that this shallow pride is great for a second. I'd achieve something and celebrate for 5 minutes and then have to go on to the next thing that I'm unhappy with. And that just wasn't working for me.
It was like, if I don't like who I am just inherently, then let me go out and be this other thing. In that case, it was an orchestral musician. Did I say that correctly? Yes. Orchestral musician. And I can be that thing. And I bet I can be that thing well. But even that was never good enough. And you're right. It wasn't really who you were. It was a role that you were playing. It was an external thing, but it temporarily would alleviate some of but I don't like who I am, just me being me.
Right. And really, at that time, I could just say that the opinions of other people, regardless of who they were, they could be my parents, they could be teachers, they could be total strangers, their opinions shaped who I was, what I did, what I said, how I felt. And I had no say in any of that. And so, of course, anyone, if someone says something bad about you, you're going to care. That's totally normal and totally healthy. But I know then that I was in a place where if anyone said anything or thought anything, that reflected on me, and I have to do something about that.
Yeah, taking all of that so personally because you don't know how to feel about yourself.
Right. That's a big burden for anyone, because you just can't fit into everyone in the world's idea of what you're supposed to do. So that's just a recipe for anxiety and depression and, in my case, addiction and all sorts of other problems.
Right, because you're never going to be good enough to be correct or perfect or lovable in everyone's eyes. So you're always trying to morph yourself. It's like you're trying to make yourself into a pretzel, but everyone wants a different shape. And you never quite the right shape.
Yeah, really chameleon-like.
Yeah. And it's exhausting. And it just always makes you feel less than.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so it was definitely showing up in external pursuits. Right?
Yes.
Like, well, if I don't love who I am, I got to go do some other stuff that's going to prove my worth. And I also have to seek out other people's responses to me to figure out who I am and what's valuable about me and how I need to change. And then you mentioned addiction, right? Like that was another avenue of a lack of self-love.
Yes, definitely.
So I'm curious because I know that you have done a lot of work with, obviously recovering from your own addiction, but helping other people recover from addictive behaviors as well. This might seem obvious, but I feel like there's nuances to this. So what do you see as the correlation between that lack of self-love and addiction? And maybe some other ways that a lack of self-love can manifest itself in some destructive behaviors that you've experienced or you've experienced in other people?
Yeah, so there's a common saying in recovery, I remember hearing it very quickly, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And while I think that that's absolutely accurate, I might argue that the real opposite of addiction is self-love or self-acceptance, self-forgiveness, self-compassion. I'm going to bundle all that into self-love. And something like connection is what can come from having healthy self-love, one of the many things. And so in my experience anyway, and so much of what I've observed in other people, the real root cause of addiction is self-hate.
Yeah.
And so many of the problems in anyone's lives, if they don't necessarily come directly from self-hate, obviously that's not always going to be the case. You lose someone you love, that has nothing to do with self-hate. But the parts of that that can start to become and feel unmanageable, that's when self-hate plays a hand. Maybe you lost someone and now your own self-doubt makes you think, oh, but I could have done this and they might have lived, or, oh, it was my fault, and, oh, something else that I could have done, or, somehow it comes back on me. And that is when it really feels unmanageable to deal with. Grief can start to become shame and impossible to deal with and imagine getting through the other side. And that's when self-hate can spiral a problem into something that you'll end up, in my case, using drugs over. In anyone's case, it could be lack of communication with relationships that can lead to lack of connection. It could lead to ego, become an egomaniac, someone that people don't trust, that because you don't trust yourself, you have to over exaggerate qualities because you can't forgive yourself or trust yourself or whatever it is. It can certainly lead to judgment of yourself and judgment of others and hate for others. There's a huge problem with that in the world, of course. For me, a lot of it led to a loss of purpose and a loss of authenticity. I mentioned before that I lived my life based on what others thought of me. And of course, in that, there's no way to build a sense of self or a sense of real strong connections with people. And of course, if connection is what helps root out addiction and self-hate keeps you from being able to connect, then self-hate really is the root problem.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's almost like the isolation is a side effect of the self-hate. So the self-hate is like at the root of it, which turns into a lack of connection, which can turn into even more destructive behaviors like addiction or like sabotaging relationships or like overexerting control or things that are not actually helping you get what you want in any way and probably actually sabotaging what you want. That's actually a question that's coming to mind right now is I wonder if some of those self-destructive behaviors that come from that self-hate or lack of self-love, to you, does it feel like it's self-punishment or is it just numbing or something else or a combination?
Yeah, I think yes.
All the above.
I think that depends greatly on the person and the situation. It certainly could be both. I know for me personally, it was more of self-hate kind of caused me to be unable to see reality for what it is. Mm-hmm. Everything that I experienced or thought was then filtered through that lens. And so, whether it was something I did or something someone else did, it would always end up with this negative spin on it that was completely come up with by me based on my own self-hating feelings. And I could never really accurately judge or really fact check anything that was coming in. Say someone gave me a compliment, rejection, that's not true. But if someone says anything negative or even what was supposed to be a constructive criticism, then okay, I must be XYZ. I must have done this badly. That spirals into I must be bad, whatever else. And so for me, I don't think I was really ever consciously punishing myself. Like I don't deserve to have this, therefore I'm going to make sure I don't have it. It wasn't quite that linear, but that ended up being the end result at the end of the day.
That makes sense. In the experience of it, it's more like I'm living in this alternate reality, which isn't actually based on the real world. It's just this alternate reality where I'm the worst, where I'm not lovable, and I'm trying to navigate through a world where I don't actually know where my place is, and I don't know what value I bring. So I end up doing these behaviors that are not at all productive because I don't believe in myself.
Right.
And so it ends up looking self-punishing and self-destructive and self-sabotaging, but it just feels like, it almost just feels like that's the only choices you have in that alternate reality that you're living in.
Right. And living in that alternate reality is very depressing.
Yeah.
And sometimes, everyone at some point in their life has done destructive behaviors or made a poor choice when they're that depressed all the time. It's just what people do.
Yeah, which is why I know you and I kind of share some thoughts about this. I just feel like when someone is doing self-destructive behaviors, that could be an addiction, that could be sabotaging relationships, that could be not having healthy, habits with food or exercise or it could be whatever behavior is not serving that person. And everyone can see this is destructive. And there's this ideology that we'll just stop doing that. Just quit doing it, kind of take the cold turkey approach, even especially if we are talking about addiction in rehab facilities. And there's just this completely cut you off from this thing and just changing a behavior overnight, which in that reality you just described, where it's but this is just my world, where this is all I maybe really deserve or all I'm capable of or all I know how to do. That to me feels like a challenging approach. Not that it never works, but it feels like maybe not the most helpful approach to overcoming an addictive behavior or a self-destructive behavior.
No, definitely not. I think when you're thinking the literal cold turkey approach, I think the only time that works is with addiction to a substance. And even then, not always. And it's not always the best approach. For me, in the drug that I used, I needed to go to a place where I was basically forced not to use for a little while. Felt depressed and isolated before, and then you add a drug that's classified as a depressant on top of that, and you use that constantly, your brain is just not healthy anymore. Just, you can scan it. You can take scientific brain scans of it and see that part of it is blank and dark and inactive. So, in order to heal that, you just need time clean. But even for other drugs, that's not always the healthiest option. It's not always even a safe option. For certain drugs, even just the withdrawals of them can kill you. This when you get into medically assisted detox and all of that, which is becoming more and more of the go-to method for some of the harder drugs like heroin or methamphetamines, even alcohol. But along with that, it's still very guided, and there's still someone not really forcing you, because in a lot of situations you can opt out of that. But there is someone there giving you your medications, making sure that it's regulated and you're taking them as prescribed. So it's still a little borderline cold turkey, just in the fact that you're limited in how much you choose. But again, I think that really only applies to substance addiction.
Yeah, when there's a very physiological component.
Right. If it's a behavioral, you can't just walk up to a place and say, hey, make me not do this. That
Right.
doesn't work. Someone can't just throw you into a facility. Your family can't throw you into a facility and say, hey, make them stop. That doesn't.
Right.
Any rational person whatsoever is going to fight against that with everything they have.
Right.
That's not just an addict thing. That's an everyone thing. That's a normal response to someone trying to force you.
Yeah.
Even if they try, you're going to say no.
And I'm even thinking about it when we are talking about substances, the actual behavior might sometimes need to be a cold turkey approach, but the rehabilitation can't be. You
Cold
can't
turkey
you can't just change your thought process and be like, now I'm a person who loves and respects myself and wants to treat myself well, and is going to change all of my other behaviors that were leading to the substance addiction. So even when you can change whatever the behavior is that you want to change cold turkey, there's a lot going underneath of that. You can't just flip a switch in your brain. Right. Unfortunately, I wish we could.
Right, that'd be so much easier.
I wish we could. But you and I have talked a lot about the power of taking baby steps, which I know is not sexy. It's not fun.
No, it's not.
Nobody wants to talk about like incremental, like half-step progress. It's kind of like womp womp.
I know. But, and of course, especially if you struggle with something like self-hate, then you'll look at baby steps and be like, that's not enough progress. I need to do better. I can do better than that. Come on.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you feel like what you need is huge sweeping change to finally say, see, I can make changes and I can do things and I can feel proud of what I've done here. But oftentimes those are very short-lived. Like you described earlier, you can have those successes, but if you don't have that base of self-love in the first place, then those big changes only give you a very, very fleeting sense of pride.
Yes.
So if we're talking about sustainable change and like deep change underneath whatever the behavior is you want to change, it kind of has to be baby steps.
It's always, honestly, it's even those that are in a place where they're capable of making big steps right away, that's not necessarily always sustainable. Mm-hmm. And so eventually everyone is going to get to the point in their lives where they just can't do these huge leaps all at once. And I really struggle with this because, I'm that person that I have to do so much, otherwise I'm a failure. And so if I can't make these huge leaps, then I just completely shut down. I get sleepy. I don't have motivation. I get just a case of the screw-its, and I get stuck. I get stuck in the mud and can't see any way out because I can't make these huge leaps. And sometimes in my mind, that's the only way to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I know people listening to this are like, yes, I just am so ready for change. And it feels too big, or it feels like I do it and then I backslide and I keep trying to go at this and like maybe it's a big career change, or maybe I want to move, or maybe I want to overcome some internal beliefs and blocks that I have that feel really big and scary, or I want to start a business, or I want to do these big things. And I feel like if I don't just do them, then I'm a failure. But I also don't want to take baby steps because it's lame and boring and I'm not going to give myself enough credit for that. So I'm curious, because I know that you have started to embrace the idea of taking some baby steps. And again, it's not always the most fun and it's definitely not the most sexy. But I feel like it started to shift your ability about like what you can do and what feels approachable and it doesn't, so you don't feel so stuck in this big mountain you have to climb. It's like, no, I can just take these small steps. So I'm curious if there's anything you want to share about how you have been implementing some baby steps, or just how you've become okay with that.
Yeah, it's really more of the idea of it. Mm-hmm. And I've just gotten to the point where any progress is better than no progress. Mm-hmm. any progress, like, I'm wanting something big and bold and glamorous that I can feel proud about. But if that doesn't work, then it doesn't give me any pride. And so even tiny shreds of pride from tiny steps are better than nothing. And so it's really, for me, looking at the whole of my life and looking how many times have I tried to always do the huge things, to always be the perfect student. For me, early in recovery, I was the perfect recovering addict. I had to do, my counselors had to love me. I had to make these huge steps. I had to become a leader and some sort of inspiration. And it was way too early for me to have been doing that. And I relapsed because I just couldn't keep up with this expectation that I was putting on myself. And so I have learned time and again in my life that by being so obsessed with making big glamorous moves and having big glamorous pride to go with it, I end up going nowhere in the long run, and sometimes even going backwards. And if what I'm really looking for is something to be internally proud of, then maybe I should try the baby step method and see if that actually works. Yeah. And so far it has.
Oh, you're making such a good point about one of the real risks of being someone who's committed to making big change all the time is then you have pressure to maintain it and keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger and better and more perfect. And eventually you will crumble under that pressure.
Yeah, it'd be one thing if it was make a few big steps and then you're done. Congrats, you made it. But, I know, at least for me and someone that struggles with self-love, that I can make all the big steps in the world and I'm always going to come up with another one. And eventually I either just get tired or something bad happens in my life that I have a hard time dealing with. And then making those huge steps just isn't a possibility right now. And that's when I start to slide back down the mountain.
Yep. Because you're like, well, if it's big change or nothing, and I don't feel capable of doing that right now, I guess it's nothing.
Right.
Which doesn't actually feel any better.
No, that just adds to my shame and my self-hate when I do nothing.
Yeah.
And so really it's a lose-lose situation. Either I get all this pride quickly and then lose it, or I never even try and never have it to begin with. Neither of those options is what I want.
Yeah. I know. Can we just give it up? I understand why nobody wants to give it up because it just feels so exciting to make big, massive change in life. But I think I think you can tell from experience, it just doesn't last for very long. And it doesn't actually make you feel good. And in fact, it contributes more to the self-hate than to the self-love. Whereas saying, I'm going to do this small thing and it's not really brag worthy, but it's a thing that I can do and feel like there's progress being made. And then I actually do it because it was approachable and not too overwhelming. And then I'm like, wow, I did a thing. And then you build up a little bit more momentum. And then you're like, I can do one more thing. And then I can do another thing. And then I can do another couple of things. And you start to build your own sense of self and your sense of self-love and self-trust because you see the progress happening and you don't feel the pressure to maintain this huge new thing. And you don't feel like, oh my gosh, is the floor going to drop out from under me at any point because you've been slowly building that solid foundation. So it's easier to actually develop your sense of self-love that way.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so this baby steps approach is definitely making me think about something that you shared in email the other day that I personally am just curious for you to talk more about.
I think I know what this is.
This is your...
Are we allowed to say that on here, or are we going to paraphrase?
Why not? It's my podcast.
Okay.
It's the whatever the fuck works method.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite method.
Which I just love. So can you tell us more about that?
So this is when, I was talking about sometimes cold turkey is necessary. Sometimes it's not helpful. Sometimes this, sometimes that. You get a lot of, in all of this, whether it's working on helping yourself or you're, advising someone else on how to work on themselves, all of it is going to be a giant answer of it depends. What do I do? It depends. Depend on the person. It can depend on the situation. And this is one of the problems that I find, especially in any sort of quote unquote program, whether that's a self-help program or, in my experience, addiction recovery programs. A lot of times there's a lot of rules of what you can and can't do, or you can't do this until you get 6 months of clean time, or you should be doing this or you shouldn't be doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And from what I can see, those rules and regulations help some people, but it's kind of just statistical chance on which people it works on and which people it doesn't. It just happens to work really well for some. But then the other people, what do you do if these rules don't work for you? And so that's when I come up with the whatever the fuck works method, because everyone's recovery journey is so different. And there's no way to know for sure what is going to work for each individual person until they try it.
Yeah.
And so,
yes.
An example I can think of for this is non-alcoholic beers and wines and cocktails are such a hot topic in recovery for people who struggle with alcohol. And I know a lot of people who have tried them and were like, oh my God, I had this non-alcoholic beer and all it made me think about was how much I want a real one.
Yeah.
Like it just brought me right into that place where I wanted to feel the effects of alcohol along with the taste, and I just could not stop thinking about it. And in that case, if you've gotten to the point where you want to try that and that's your experience, great. Not the tool for you. And in other cases, especially after someone has had a little more time to get out of the alcoholic habit, but they just want, maybe they're in a situation where they have to be around people drinking and they want to have a cocktail in their hand maybe it's to keep people from bothering them. Maybe it's just to feel like they fit in some way, or maybe just because they think they're delicious. Sometimes that can really help a person. And it keeps that craving at bay. You have something, but this something isn't unhealthy at all. There's no alcohol in it. And if it keeps you from craving what is unhealthy for you, then that could be a really helpful tool.
Yeah.
And which person that is going to love it and which person that's going to make them crave, it's impossible to tell until those people try it. And so that's what I just tell someone, if you feel like you're in a place where you're safe enough to try it, even if it doesn't work for you, then try it. And if it doesn't work, great, you learned something. If it does, great, you have a new tool. Whatever the fuck works.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
It doesn't matter that much what works, as long as it does.
It doesn't really matter. And what I love so much about this whole concept, and I'm so glad you're bringing this up because this is such a universal application. I'm thinking of a lot of clients even who they'll read a self-help book or they'll read some advice article and they're like, okay, this is how I have to do things. This is how I'm going to get a new job, or this is how I'm going to write my novel, or this is what people do. And then they try it and then it doesn't work for them. And then they decide, well, clearly I'm broken. Like this works for people,
or
but
did it wrong.
Yeah.
Whatever else.
There's something wrong with me and again, all we're doing here is actually contributing to self-hate, which we know creates more destructive behaviors, not contributing to self-love, which is, I'm going to learn about myself because I'm a unique human and I don't believe that there is a one-size-fits-all approach to all kinds of change. And if something doesn't work for me, it's just not a fit. That's it. Almost like going on dates. You know what I mean? Like you go on a date and you're like, okay, well, we didn't really mesh. That doesn't mean I'm not lovable or I'm broken or something's wrong with me or the other person, just not a match. Same with whatever strategy you're using. For example, I'm thinking of an example of a client recently who's like, I want to write, I want to be a novelist, and I've heard you have to write every day. Like that is how all the writers who I admire in interviews, they say, no matter whether I feel like it or not, I sit down and I write every single day. And she's like, I try to sit down and I write every day, and it doesn't work for me. I procrastinate, I put it off, I don't do my best work. But what ends up happening is every week or two, I'll just have this big burst of inspiration and I'll write a whole bunch down and I'll create this, I'll just get into this flow. And then I won't write again for a couple of weeks, but I'm doing it wrong. I'm like, but you're writing.
Yeah.
So in her case, that's the approach that works for her. The other one doesn't work. It doesn't need to work. Not all the approaches need to work for you to be able to overcome procrastination or addiction or self-destructive behaviors or internal belief systems. Whatever works is fine. And if something doesn't work, okay, let's try something else. I want to have this experimenter's approach.
It's really more scientific in just trying a bunch of things. You input something and you get an output and you analyze whether that worked or not. And if it did, great. If it didn't, okay, on to the next thing.
Yeah, but a scientist isn't like, I'm the worst scientist in the lab because I didn't get the result. They're like, okay, try a new experiment.
This experiment didn't go the way I hoped it would. No, it just didn't work that way. And really it's, I go back to like programs trying to, it could be books, it could be anything trying to tell you exactly how to do something a certain way. And I feel like a lot of people go to these because they're trying to simplify it. Like do this, not that, eat this, not that. Trying to simplify whatever their problem is. Mm-hmm. But what ends up happening is they make it so much more complicated.
Yeah.
Because now you have to change, in order for that to work for you, now you have to change everything that you do and feel and think to fit into this certain tool that's supposed to work. And that is probably impossible and very complicated and very time consuming.
Yeah.
And I personally think that whatever works is a really simple way to do it.
Yeah, because otherwise we're operating under the assumption that all humans are essentially the exact same.
Yes,
which we know.
We all can agree that is probably not true.
Not at all true. So if we agree that we are not at all the same in our physiology and our life experience and our belief systems and our goals and our desires and our fears, if all of us have a very different mixture of that, it doesn't even make sense to assume we're all everything that we do to try to make changes is going to work for all of us the same way. It's just incorrect. And so if you come from a place of self-curiosity versus self-judgment, if something doesn't work, then I think it's actually a demonstration of self-love to say, I want to learn about myself. I want to learn what works and doesn't work for me. And I want to spend more time and energy on things that are going to work. And I'm going to let other things go, even if they work for every other person I know. If it doesn't work for me, that's okay. I want to find out what does work for me. Like that is an act of self-love. It's the same way as you would show love to another person, someone that you really care about. You're like, hey, what do you love to do? And I want to learn about you and your interests and your goals because I care about you.
Right.
You can and should do the same thing for yourself.
Exactly. Also, I feel like it's good practice for self-love because, I'll go straight back to addiction for this, is so many people, when they struggle with addiction, they tell themselves and have other people tell them that you just make bad choices or you just can't think rationally or, you just don't know what's best for you. And so this method is such good practice because what it says is, I know when I advise someone to use this method, what's that saying is, I believe you're perfectly capable of making a rational and informed decision, regardless of how much time you've had clean or how much time you were addicted, regardless of whatever you've done in your life before. I believe that you're capable of figuring out for yourself what works.
Which is
And
so empowering.
It is so empowering. There are certain programs that I have experienced that say for the first 6 months to a year of recovery, everything you think and feel is wrong. You're an addict. Everything you think and feel is wrong right now. Like, that's the message that you're giving people who already struggle with self-hate. Right. And self-hate is the root of their problems.
I think we're digging in the hole here. We're not digging out of the hole.
The message you're giving them. And, substances really can hurt your brain. That is scientifically proven. That is true. But I have yet to see someone, even on their first day sober, that isn't capable of making a rational decision for themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for someone else to say, I believe that you can make a rational decision for yourself. And also to say, I believe that you know yourself better than I know you or anyone else knows you. So you have this like intimate knowledge of yourself that is going to actually take you a lot further than this external process. Again, not saying explore processes. Sure, explore options, read all the books and go to the meetings and listen to the podcasts and inform yourself on the possibilities, but don't assume one has to work, and don't assume if one doesn't that it's something inherently wrong with you. It just means you know yourself better than that quote unquote expert knew you.
Right.
And that should be empowering. That's
it.
Yep.
That's a really good thing to know about yourself, that, we, as people in addiction recovery, we often get told too that we're liars, especially to ourselves. Mm. And that has been true in certain parts of our life, but that's not always true. Mm-hmm. Not every, if I have a non-alcoholic cocktail and I think, yeah, this is actually fine, this is actually helping, that doesn't just mean I'm in denial.
Right.
It might actually be helping.
Right.
And I believe that people are capable of knowing whether it helps or not by themselves.
Yeah.
Nobody has to tell them what works.
Well, this already feels like, I wanted to ask you what it feels like on the other side of for the most part, you do like who you are now. And you have really worked hard to cultivate a sense of self-love. And I think that's one of the things that has come out of it right there is you give yourself permission to just do whatever the fuck works for you.
Yes.
And not care so much about what works for other people or what other people think you should be doing. It's I know and I trust myself to know what's best. And I trust myself to let me know when something isn't working. And that's a part of living a life where I like and love myself. I wonder, how else does life feel different when you have cultivated that sense of self-love?
Yeah, I wrote on my notes page that it feels like reality. Mm. But I think I'm going to amend that, because I also do remember when I hated so much of myself that felt like reality at the time. So I'm going to scrap reality. And I guess this feels more of just an intrinsic knowing feeling.
Yeah.
That I know what is true about myself. And if I don't, and in the moments where I get confused, I know that I'll be able to figure it out. Mm-hmm. I know that I'll be able to, when I get an idea in my head, I know that I'll be able to rationally fact check that idea and look at other parts of my life to either confirm or deny that theory, or look to other people to help me confirm or deny that theory instead of just accepting it as true.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm capable of seeing all of life's evidence as it relates to me. Mm-hmm. Regardless of whether it's positive or negative, I'm capable of looking at all of it.
Yeah, a sense of clarity and clear-mindedness, and also a sense of self-reliance is what I'm hearing you say, too.
Yeah.
I don't have to rely on external mile markers or external substances or I don't have to really rely on anything external to get me to where I want to go. I can go internal. And even if I don't know the answer, or even if I am having moments of self-doubt, I know how to work through that. And I trust myself to be able to, maybe I do seek out help, but I don't seek out numbing. or I don't seek out replacements. I seek out genuine support.
Right. And even wanting to seek out support is so different for me. Before I never would have sought out someone that supports me or something that supports me. I didn't feel like it was worth it. That no one will support me. Nothing out there supports me. So I'm not ever even going to look. And it's
that
such
makes
a
so much
freeing
sense.
feeling to be able to even look for people that really love you.
Right. Because if you don't love yourself, you don't expect anyone else to love you. So you're not going to go seek them out.
Right. And so I've never liked the saying that if you can't love yourself, you can't expect anyone else to love you. I don't think that's at all true. But what I do think is true, that if you don't love yourself, you won't notice whether people really love you.
Yes. That is so accurate
People
because it's
will
true.
still love you, but
People
you won't
will,
know.
but you won't feel it. It won't get in.
No, it won't.
And so you won't go seek it out when you really need it. You're going to isolate. And the people who love you are probably going to try, and you're going to be like, no, I don't really deserve that. So yeah, you can absolutely be loved by others, but you won't really feel it unless you like yourself first.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. That's so good.
She's a friend of my mom's, actually, but she's one of the wisest people I've ever met in my life. And she had this whole thing. We used to work together. She used to help me do kind of more meditation therapy. I'm a little more on the logical side of things. She's a little more on the woo-woo side.
Mm-hmm.
And together we kind of meshed brains, and it was very interesting. But she got me onto this track of doing things even if they were unconventional. And this was one of the first times I ever really started to consciously practice self-love and self-forgiveness. Because, I was saying before that everything someone said about me or thought about me shaped who I was and how I lived. And so I was a master at trying to conform to society's norms or, this person that I wanted to impress, their expectations, whatever else. And the idea of being unconventional was just terrifying to me. Unconventional to me went weird, not normal, not okay, you'll never be accepted. And that's it. Unconventional equals bad.
Yeah.
And she would just tell me, she's like, just do something that's unconventional. I don't care what it is. It could be something tiny and stupid. It could be go to Starbucks and not be on your phone or your laptop. Just sit there like a creep.
Isn't that crazy that that's unconventional now? But it is. You're so right.
And she'd give me, I don't think that was the exact example. I just pulled that out of nowhere just now. But she would tell me, she's like, it could be something little and random. Just do something unconventional as practice and just see how it is. Does anybody really stare at you and make fun of you in the distance like you think they will? Or do people really not care that much if you're doing something unconventional? And I started doing these little things, and I started to realize that people just weren't really paying attention to me that much. They didn't notice. I was doing something a little weird. They didn't notice. And that started to branch out into these bigger parts of my life where I could do something that wasn't society's norm. The big one that I did was I didn't go back to college. I've never graduated. And it's in this country, and especially in the area that I live, where you go to high school and you go to college and you go there for 4 years and then you graduate and then you get your entry level position and then you work for the rest of your life at a 9 to 5 and then you retire and then you die. Like that's the conventional. And so that was the big thing for me that I had a hard time standing out of at that time, was just not having a college degree, just not finishing. I just didn't want to do it. But everything seemed to tell me that I, quote unquote, should. And a big way that I practiced was I just know. Why should I? Why in my life should I?
Yeah,
other than it just being the thing to do. And when I really looked at it, I had no reason to do that, at least not right then. Maybe someday in the future, that will be a good option for me. But then and since then, I've had no reason to do the conventional thing. It would not have helped. So it was really good exercise for me to be able to say, I'm not doing that because that doesn't work for me. I'm going to do whatever the fuck works for me, regardless of whether it's unconventional or not.
Yes.
And that has been so freeing and so helpful that I can really do what's best for me.
Yeah, what an expression of self-love to say, I don't have to just take the path laid out that everyone else is taking that may or may not work for me. I think a lot of times there's this idea that if I go off course, quote unquote, and do something that's different from how other people are doing it, then maybe there's something wrong with me, or maybe I screwed up, or maybe, again, it's something, it goes back to some sort of personal flaw, usually is where our brains like to take it. And when you can build up and say, I'm going to do some unconventional things and recognize it has no bad consequences, and I can be just as happy and just as successful, and maybe actually more so because I'm doing it in a way that is much more aligned with who I am. That's a huge way of practicing self-love, is to not just do all the things you're supposed to do, but do some small things off track and realize, I kind of like that better. Or if I don't, maybe I do want to go back to a conventional path, but I'm choosing it. I'm choosing it because I want it, not because I feel like I need to belong, or I feel like I need to be seen in a certain way, which again is those external motivators, which are not really helping you know yourself better or like yourself better. So that's what a cool practice. I actually want to make that a challenge for people listening, is can you do something unconventional this week? Maybe come tell us about it too, because it's very uncomfortable. It's very vulnerable, but it'll also prove nothing really bad happens. And if I can do that, maybe I can do some bigger things.
Yeah. And the real beauty of it is I feel it really starts to make you or help you be able to question those self-hate messages. You know, like I said, with the whole, should I go back to school? Should I not? I eventually just got to the point where I was like, well, why should I? And that was a bit of a rebellious way of saying that, but it was also true. I also had to logically look, why should I? And the answer for me was no real reason other than people say you should. But that could be true with anything. You're worried about, a lot of people are worried about their appearance, how they dress, their hairstyle, how that makes people perceive them. If you look at something on the rack and you like it, but it's not in fashion norm or whatever, and so you quote unquote shouldn't wear it. Well, why not? What is the harm going to do if you wear that and it makes you feel awesome? Why shouldn't you do that? That's a great idea.
I love that. Like, what a way of practicing unconventionality instead of just blending in, which will make me feel accepted, but also kind of invisible. Right. I can do something a little bit vulnerable and say, I like this and I'm going to wear it, or I'm going to choose it, or I'm going to do it. And people might not get it, but that's me respecting my own desires and recognizing I am different. I have some unique qualities and I can express them and nothing really bad happens.
Nothing bad.
The world's not going to end because you decided to wear a bright sweater and it's the middle of winter.
No.
And you're supposed to wear dark colors or whatever.
There's a lot of people that might actually admire you for that. They're like, oh, thank God, someone who's not wearing black and gray.
Exactly. Well, this is because I was curious what advice you might have for people who are trying to cultivate some self-love. And I think this is a really good one right off the bat, is practice doing small, unconventional things just because you're curious, or just because you want to try it, or just because you don't want to keep doing the same old that you're supposed to be doing, and you want to learn what you like and dislike. So what other advice would you give to people? Because I know that there's a lot of people listening to this right now who are on their own self-love struggle. And if we're talking about, these can be baby steps. because we just talked about the fact that we're both fans of baby steps. So yeah, what would you tell someone who's struggling with that right now?
So yeah, this is something that I wrote an article about just recently, actually. And I've come up with kind of a two-part practical method to use to practice it. Now, this can be in tiny ways. It could be in huge ways. It doesn't matter. It applies to everything. And the part one, I decided to call Snopes Yourself. And so this is when logic can come in handy. You know, so much logic can be used as one of self-love's biggest enemies, but it can also be an invaluable advocate if you know how to apply it. And so for this, you know, I would challenge someone to think of something they just don't like about themselves. It could be something that someone said. It could be something that they've just always felt about themselves, something they've observed, you know, a bad choice that they made, whatever else. And so imagine yourself as a lawyer in a courtroom defending you as you are from whatever self-hate is trying to tell you. And so that try to bring in evidence. What evidence can you draw upon to prove hate wrong? What examples do you have? It could be in your life. It could be in someone else's life to contradict what hate's telling you. And in the article I used, you know, of course, I wrote this from an addiction professional's perspective. So I started to talk about everyone struggling with addiction has a stigma about that. We've all heard stuff along the lines of, you know, how could you not see this coming? How could you not know better? You must be an idiot. You must just have no self-control. And especially that self-control one really comes up a lot. And so I would challenge someone to think, what examples in your life have you demonstrated any kind of self-control? Did you crave an unhealthy food but said no because you knew it wouldn't be good for you? Did you really want to buy something but it was just too expensive, so you said no? I mean, those are tiny examples, but if you really had zero control, you would have said yes to all of those.
Yep.
It wouldn't have mattered. You'd go into debt. Your health would be awful because you'd eat candy all day. It could be anything. And even bigger examples, you can think of highly renowned bigwig CEOs that have struggled with addiction. And you can't tell me that someone with that caliber of job has no self-control. Or NFL players that as soon as they retire, they start to fall into addictive behaviors, regardless of what it is. I'm like, you can't tell me an NFL player has no discipline.
Right.
Try to prove it. That I dare you.
And all of us could come up with it if we decided to look for the evidence instead of look for evidence of the problem. If we looked for evidence of, I actually do have this and I have used it before, you will always find answers. Yes, it's a matter of where you put your attention. So I love that visual of being in a courtroom and having to make a case for yourself.
Yeah, and it's good practice coming up with these examples because sometimes you've done these things before. You might have just forgotten in that self-hate. Just you're so focused on one aspect of your life that you just forget. And so I guess with that, I'll move on to part two. This is just self-compassion. I wouldn't necessarily call it self-love. I'll call it self-compassion. So this basically, at least for me, this is what happens when the Snopesing starts to not work.
Yep.
So for example, in my life, early in recovery, I just had this idea that I must just make poor decisions. I just make bad choices. I knew that addiction was possible when I started using this drug. I'd even have people tell me I had an addictive personality and I'd probably be susceptible to it. I had a close friend who was addicted to the exact same drug and I did it anyway. And I know that I knew better at the time, but I still did it. And so when I look at facts, there are facts that point to the fact that I made a bad choice, that I knew better and I chose otherwise. And so I struggled with this one, how to forgive myself for that massive of a screw up for a couple years in recovery. And when I finally got this aha moment, I was telling a close friend about some of the things that happened in my life leading up to my addiction. Like what really triggered that usage? What started it all? Other than, a lifetime of self-hate. What pulled the trigger? What pulled the pin on that self-hate grenade? And so, of course, I gave him all the nitty-gritty details on a lot of major life upsets just slammed into me all within a few months of each other. And I told him all the details, and his immediate reaction was, "Holy shit, I would have done drugs too."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me. I swear to God, because I had never thought of that before. I was so focused on, I had so much stress and I made this poor choice because of it. That must mean I can't handle stress. And I don't know how to make good decisions. And what do I do? What if I make another bad decision? And this whole spiral. And I had never stopped to think that a lot of people might have made that same choice.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has had things that were stressing and confusing, and they didn't know how to handle it, and they didn't know what to do. And everyone has felt that way at some point in their lives. And
Yes.
Everyone has made a poor choice of some sort when they have felt that way. Everyone. No one's immune to that.
Yeah, and when you go back and look at what led to all kinds of behaviors or experiences in your life, it makes so much sense. I mean, I have been able to, the beautiful part about being a coach is that you get to hear really in depth in people's stories. And people's stories always make sense when you go back.
Right.
And you can always have compassion and say, wow, in that scenario, it makes total sense why that was how you reacted. Anyone in your situation would have had that sort of a reaction. That's not a deficiency in you. That's just, that was a lot for one human to try to be experiencing. And of course you had to find a way of just getting through and handling it. And that's not always pretty.
Yeah.
But that compassion piece is so important. And I love the combination of these. Because it is using the emotional piece and the logical.
Right. That compassion piece, it's so hard.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you can look at some facts and say, whatever I did or said or thought wasn't necessarily right or healthy or productive. But it does make it understandable.
Yeah.
And so I know for myself that I am capable of having compassion and empathy for someone else if they make a poor choice in understandable circumstances. And so just about anybody listening to this, can you think of someone that you know that has done something wrong? And were you able to understand why? Did you forgive them for it? Did you judge them? Did you judge their entire lives and who they are as a whole on this single thing? No, of course not. And so if you're capable of not judging someone else by a single action and looking at them more by who they are as a whole, as a person, and what they do to make up for a wrongdoing, if you're capable of doing that for someone else, then you are capable of doing it for yourself. It is harder, usually, to do it for yourself, but it is possible. And if everyone else in the world that you meet, if you think they deserve it, it does not make any sense why you would be the one person in the world that doesn't deserve compassion and forgiveness for a mistake.
Right. You're not that special.
That doesn't logically line up. If all these people you meet, they can tell you something, be like, oh yeah, I understand why you did that. It's okay. You still deserve love or forgiveness or a friend or whatever else. You're not the only one in the world that doesn't deserve that. That's just not going to happen.
Nope. That just doesn't even make sense. You deserve it too. Every single person listening to this deserves compassion, and other people can try to give it to you all they want. But in the same way as if you don't love yourself, you can't feel other people's love. If you don't have compassion for yourself, you won't accept other people's compassion. So this has to be an inside job. And I'm just I'm just so blown away. I mean, every time I talk to you, I feel this way, but I'm just so blown away by like your wisdom and by like just the experience that you have had. And I guarantee you people listening to this would assume you're like 85 years old.
Aww,
the life wisdom that you have
my
been
goal
spewing
is to be
in
a
this.
wise old man someday. that is the dream.
I think you're already closer than you think. You're just a wise old man in a young man's body. So that's the best of all worlds. This has been so amazing. I know this is what some people need to hear right now. I hope those of you who need a little reminder of self-love will come back and re-listen to this when you need a little boost. Adam is such a great example of like, this is possible. You can go from an entire childhood of not liking yourself to being someone who now is able to share with others how to get to a place of self-love. So I hope your story is inspiring, because if you can do it, every single person listening can create this within themselves too. And life is so much better on the other side.
Oh gosh, it really is. It's work. It's a lot of work to dig into stuff that makes you that uncomfortable. But oh man, I could never have thought. I had no idea I wasn't even living in reality. It's so nice up here.
Come join us,
out
everyone.
in the real world where you can accept a compliment. It's amazing.
Yeah, I know. The little things, they mean so much when you're in this healthier headspace. So, Adam, I could talk to you about this forever because I feel like there's so many more questions I have for you, but I'm going to cut it off for now. I'll probably want to have you back as an expert at some point because I feel like you're already acting like an expert in a lot of these arenas. So
that would be, I am looking forward to that so much.
I feel like there's more we can get into. So I definitely want to do that at some point. But for now, thank you so much. This has been such an important topic. And I think you are the perfect person to talk about it. So thank you for your time and your wisdom and for giving people that little boost to say, hey, like there's another way to live. And I promise it's better.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on. It was a delight. And I actually really enjoyed it. I can't believe we've been talking for an hour.
I know.
Didn't even notice.
It always goes so fast. So that just means we're in the flow. So I love it. Well, thank you so much. And I'm sure I will talk to you soon. And hopefully the listeners will hear from you again at some point soon, too.
I hope so, too. Thank you so much.
Bye, Adam.
Bye.
Okay, we will be back next Tuesday or this coming Tuesday with a new Magic 8 Ball episode wherein we shake up our 200 past episodes and let whatever rises to the surface be your message that you needed for that day. So that's going to be Tuesday. We don't know what it's going to be yet. Again, we got to shake it up and see what happens.
And then remember, next Friday, the 20th, is when we're going to be opening enrollment for some coaching, one-on-one coaching spots. So if you have been thinking about doing some coaching and you don't want to wait till summer, which is when we're going to open up some spots again, then make sure that you listen to the podcast, check your email on Friday to make sure that you can sign up to talk to one of us about that.
Okay, that's it.
See you Tuesday.